My name is Detective Marcus Sullivan, and I've been working homicide for the Seattle Police Department for 23 years. I've seen cases that would make your blood run cold. But nothing prepared me for what happened on October 15, 2023. It was supposed to be the happiest day of Sarah Mitchell's life. Instead, it became the day that would haunt our entire department for months to come. The call came in at 2:47 p.m. on a Saturday afternoon. I was at home watching the Seahawks game with my son when my phone buzzed with that familiar ringtone. That meant work was calling. "Sullivan here," I answered, already reaching for my jacket. "Detective, we've got a situation at St. Mary's Cathedral downtown. Missing person, possible foul play. The bride never showed up for her wedding." I felt that familiar knot form in my stomach. Missing persons cases involving young women rarely ended well, especially when they disappeared on what should have been the most important day of their lives. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, I told dispatch, already heading for the door. My son looked disappointed, but he understood. This job doesn't wait for anyone, not even family time. The drive to St. Mary's Cathedral gave me time to think about what I might be walking into. Seattle's downtown area was bustling with typical Saturday afternoon activity, but as I pulled up to the cathedral, I could see the chaos that had erupted outside. Police cars lined the street, their red and blue lights casting an eerie glow against the Gothic architecture of the century-old church. Wedding guests stood in clusters on the sidewalk, still dressed in their finest clothes, but their faces showed confusion and growing concern. The bride's family was easy to spot. They were the ones crying and frantically making phone calls. I badged my way through the crowd and found Officer Jennifer Martinez, who had been first on scene. "What do we know?" I asked, pulling out my notebook. Martinez consulted her own notes. "Bride's name is Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell, years old, works as a pediatric nurse at Seattle Children's Hospital. She was supposed to arrive at the church at 2 p.m. for a 2:30 ceremony. The groom, David Chen, is a software engineer at Microsoft. They've been together for 4 years, engaged for 18 months. I nodded, scribbling down the basics. When did people start to worry? Around 2:15, the wedding planner tried calling Sarah's phone, no answer. By 2:30, the maid of honor was calling everyone in the wedding party. That's when they discovered something that made everyone panic. Martinez paused, and I could see the concern in her eyes. Sarah's car was found in the parking lot of Lincoln Park, about 15 minutes from here. Keys were still in the ignition, purse on the passenger seat, but no sign of Sarah. This was already sounding worse than a simple case of cold feet. Any witnesses see her at the park? That's where it gets interesting, Detective. A jogger reported seeing a woman in a white dress near the waterfront around 1:30 p.m. Said she looked distressed, like she was crying, but here's the thing. The jogger said the woman threw something into the water before walking away toward the parking area. I felt my pulse quicken. Did the jogger see what she threw? No, but about an hour ago, some kids playing near the shore found something washed up on the rocks. Martinez led me toward her patrol car and opened the trunk. Inside was an evidence bag containing what was unmistakably a bridal bouquet. White roses, baby's breath, and eucalyptus, all bound together with white silk ribbon. The flowers were waterlogged and damaged, but there was no mistaking what it was. "Jesus," I muttered under my breath. "Has anyone confirmed this is Sarah's bouquet?" The wedding planner identified it immediately. Said Sarah had been very specific about wanting white roses because they were her grandmother's favorite. The ribbon even has Sarah and David's initials embroidered on it, along with today's date. I stared at the soggy bouquet, my mind already racing through possibilities. A bride doesn't just throw away her bouquet and disappear unless something is seriously wrong. Either Sarah Mitchell had suffered some kind of breakdown and was somewhere in the city in a wedding dress, or something much more sinister had happened to her. "I need to talk to the groom," I said, handing the evidence bag back to Martinez. "And I want a full search of Lincoln Park, especially the waterfront area. If Sarah threw her bouquet in the water, there might be other evidence down there, too." David Chen was sitting in the front pew of St. Mary's Cathedral, still wearing his black tuxedo, but his bow tie was undone and hanging loose around his neck. His best man, a tall guy who introduced himself as Marcus Kim, was sitting beside him, occasionally patting David's shoulder in an awkward attempt at comfort. When I approached, David looked up with red-rimmed eyes that held a mixture of confusion and terror. "Mr. Chen, I'm Detective Sullivan with Seattle PD. I need to ask you some questions about Sarah." David nodded slowly. "Everyone keeps asking me the same thing. Did we have a fight? Was she having second thoughts? Did she seem upset about anything?" The answer is no to all of it. Sarah was excited about today. She's been planning this wedding for over a year. She had her final dress fitting on Thursday and was practically glowing. I sat down in the pew across from him, keeping my voice gentle but professional. When did you last speak with Sarah? This morning around 9 a.m. She called me from the hotel where she was getting ready with her bridesmaids. She said she couldn't wait to see me at the altar and that she loved me. That was it. Normal conversation, nothing strange at all. David's voice cracked slightly. Detective, Sarah doesn't just disappear. She's the most reliable person I know. She's never even been late for anything in the 4 years we've been together. I made notes as he spoke. Tell me about yesterday. Did you two spend time together? We had the rehearsal dinner at the Fairmont Olympic Hotel. Sarah seemed perfectly normal, happy, excited. She gave a speech thanking everyone for being there, talked about how she couldn't wait to start our life together. After dinner, she went back to the hotel with her bridesmaids, and I went home. That's the last time I saw her. Marcus Kim, the best man, leaned forward. Detective, I've known David since college, and I've known Sarah for 3 years. They're solid. No drama, no problems. Sarah was looking forward to this day more than anything. I turned my attention to Marcus. Did Sarah seem stressed about anything lately? Work, family, wedding planning? The opposite, actually. She just got a promotion at the hospital last month. She was excited about that too. And her relationship with David's family has been great. His parents flew in from California yesterday, and Sarah spent an hour at the rehearsal dinner talking with his mum about their honeymoon plans. This was painting a picture of a woman who had everything to live for and no apparent reason to disappear, which made the abandoned car and the bouquet in the water even more troubling. David, I need you to think carefully. In the past few weeks, did Sarah mention anything unusual? Anyone bothering her, following her, making her uncomfortable? David was quiet for a long moment, his brow furrowed in concentration. There was one thing, but I didn't think much of it at the time. About 2 weeks ago, Sarah said she thought someone had been in her apartment while she was at work. Nothing was missing, but she said things felt ... moved, like someone had been looking through her stuff. My pen stopped moving. Did she report it to police? No, she said she couldn't prove anything, and I thought maybe she was just stressed about the wedding. You know how it is, when you're planning something big, you can get paranoid about everything. I made a note to check Sarah's apartment thoroughly. Anything else? Phone calls, emails, someone showing up at her work. She did mention that a patient's father had been asking her personal questions, but that happens sometimes in her job. Parents get attached to the nurses who take care of their kids. I needed more details about this. Do you remember the patient's name or any specifics about the father? David shook his head. Sarah didn't want to talk about it much. She said it was probably nothing, just a grateful parent who was being a little too friendly. She's dealt with that kind of thing before. I was starting to build a timeline in my head, but there were still too many gaps. David, I need you to give me a list of everyone who knew about Sarah's schedule today, who knew what time she was supposed to leave the hotel, what route she might take to the church, anything like that. The wedding party, both families, the wedding planner, the photographer, probably about 30 people total. That was a lot of potential suspects if this turned out to be something other than a voluntary disappearance. But my gut was telling me that Sarah Mitchell hadn't walked away from her life willingly. The bouquet in the water was a message. Whether she'd thrown it there herself in desperation or someone else had put it there to throw us off the trail. One more question, David. Does Sarah know how to swim? David's face went pale. She's terrified of deep water. Has been since she was a kid. Why would you ask that? The knot in my stomach tightened. A woman who was afraid of deep water wouldn't voluntarily go near the waterfront, especially not in a wedding dress, which meant either someone had forced her there or something had happened to make her desperate enough to overcome her fear. Neither possibility was good. The Fairmont Olympic Hotel was a 15-minute drive from the cathedral, and I wanted to see Sarah's room before too much time passed. Hotel rooms could tell you a lot about a person's state of mind, especially when they were left in the middle of getting ready for the most important day of their life. I met Officer Martinez in the hotel lobby, and we took the elevator to the 7th floor. The wedding party had booked a suite where Sarah and her bridesmaids could get ready together. When we walked in, it looked like a tornado had hit it, but in the way that getting ready for a wedding always creates chaos. Makeup scattered across the bathroom counter, hairstyling tools still plugged in, champagne glasses half empty on the coffee table. But there was something else, an undercurrent of panic that you could feel in the air. Sarah's maid of honor, Jessica Walsh, was sitting on the couch, still in her bridesmaid dress, clutching a tissue. Two other bridesmaids, Amy and Rachel, were pacing around the room like caged animals. "Ladies, I'm Detective Sullivan. I need to understand exactly what happened here this morning." Jessica looked up with mascara-streaked cheeks. Sarah was fine when she left. Better than fine, she was radiant. We'd just finished her makeup, and she looked absolutely beautiful. She said she wanted to drive to the church alone to have a few minutes to herself before the ceremony. We thought it was sweet, you know? Like she wanted to compose herself and think about the moment. I pulled out my notebook. What time did she leave? Around 1:15. The ceremony wasn't until 2:30, but Sarah said she wanted to get there early and maybe sit in the quiet church for a few minutes. She's always been spiritual, and I think she wanted to say a prayer or something before walking down the aisle. Amy, one of the other bridesmaids, spoke up. She hugged each of us before she left and said she'd see us in 20 minutes when we arrived with the photographer. She was smiling. Detective. She was happy. I walked over to the area where Sarah had obviously been getting ready. Her wedding dress was hanging on a portable rack, but it was still in its garment bag. Wait, if Sarah left at 1:15, what was she wearing? The three women exchanged glances. Rachel answered quietly. She was wearing her backup dress. She brought the main dress for the ceremony and a simpler one for pictures and getting ready. She said she didn't want to risk spilling anything on the real dress before the wedding. This was new information. Can you describe the backup dress? It was white, but more casual, like a sundress, but elegant, knee-length with lace sleeves. She looked beautiful in it, but it definitely wasn't a wedding gown. So Sarah had been wearing a white dress when the jogger saw her at Lincoln Park, but not her actual wedding dress. That suggested this wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. She had planned to go somewhere before the church. Did Sarah say anything about stopping anywhere on the way to the cathedral? Jessica shook her head. She said she was going straight there. But Detective, Lincoln Park isn't on the way from here to St. Mary's. It's in the opposite direction. I was already thinking the same thing. If Sarah had intended to go straight to the church, why had she ended up at a waterfront park 15 minutes in the wrong direction? I need to look through Sarah's belongings, I said, scanning the room. Anything she left behind might give us a clue about where she was really going. The bridesmaids led me to Sarah's overnight bag, which was sitting open on the bed. Inside were the usual things you'd expect. Toiletries, a change of clothes for after the wedding, her phone charger. But at the bottom of the bag, wrapped in tissue paper, was something that made me pause. It was a small jewelry box, the kind that might hold earrings or a necklace. But when I opened it, instead of jewelry, I found a folded piece of paper and a key. The paper was a handwritten note that simply said, "If you want to know the truth about David, meet me at Lincoln Park at 1:30. Come alone, or I'll make sure he finds out about your secret too." The note wasn't signed, but it was written in block letters, like someone was trying to disguise their handwriting. The key was small and brass, the kind that might open a locker or a small safe. "Ladies, have you ever seen this note before?" I asked, holding it up. All three bridesmaids shook their heads, their faces showing genuine surprise and confusion. "What secret?" Amy asked. "Sarah doesn't have secrets. She's the most honest person we know. But everyone has secrets." I thought to myself. The question was whether Sarah's secret was worth disappearing over, or whether someone was using it to lure her into a trap. I bagged the note and the key as evidence, my mind already working through the implications. Someone had known enough about Sarah's life to get her to Lincoln Park at exactly the time the jogger had seen a distressed woman in white, someone who knew about a secret that Sarah was apparently desperate to keep hidden. "I need you all to think very carefully," I said, looking at each bridesmaid in turn. "In the past few weeks, did Sarah seem worried about anything? Did she mention anyone from her past? Anyone who might know something about her that she wouldn't want David to find out?" Jessica was the first to speak. "Sarah's been with David for 4 years. If there was something in her past that would ruin their relationship, wouldn't it have come up by now?" "Not necessarily," I replied. "Sometimes people keep things buried for years, thinking they'll never have to deal with them again. Then something happens like a wedding that brings the past back to the surface." I was already forming a theory about what had happened to Sarah Mitchell. Someone from her past had contacted her, threatened to reveal something that would destroy her relationship with David, and lured her to Lincoln Park under the pretense of a meeting. Whether she had thrown her bouquet in the water as a signal for help or whether someone else had put it there to make it look like suicide, I wasn't sure yet. But I was certain of one thing: Sarah Mitchell hadn't disappeared voluntarily. She had been taken, and whoever had taken her knew exactly which buttons to push to get her to come quietly. Asterisk 4 p.m. I had a dive team in the water at Lincoln Park. If Sarah's bouquet had ended up in Puget Sound, there was a chance that other evidence had gone in with it. The water was cold and murky, typical for October in Seattle, but our divers were experienced and thorough. I stood on the rocky shore, watching the bubbles break the surface as the team searched the bottom, when my phone rang. It was Officer Martinez calling from Sarah's apartment. "Detective, you need to get over here. We found something in Sarah's bedroom that changes everything." 20 minutes later, I was standing in Sarah Mitchell's Capitol Hill apartment, looking at what Martinez had discovered hidden behind a loose baseboard in the bedroom closet. It was a manila envelope containing documents that painted a very different picture of Sarah's past than what her friends and fiancé had described. Inside the envelope were court documents from 7 years ago in Portland, Oregon. Sarah Mitchell, then Sarah Elizabeth Thompson, had been involved in a hit-and-run accident that killed a 12-year-old boy named Timothy Walsh. She had been driving under the influence and had fled the scene. The case had been plea bargained down to vehicular manslaughter, and Sarah had served 18 months in prison before being released on probation. After her release, she had legally changed her name from Thompson to Mitchell and moved to Seattle to start over. "Jesus Christ," I muttered, reading through the documents. She never told anyone about this. Not David, not her friends, nobody. Martinez pointed to another document in the envelope. "Look at this. Detective, the victim's name was Timothy Walsh. Remember the maid of honor we just interviewed, Jessica Walsh?" The connection hit me like a punch to the gut. "You think Jessica is related to the boy Sarah killed?" I ran a background check. Jessica Walsh grew up in Portland. Her younger brother Timothy was killed in a hit-and-run 7 years ago. The driver was never identified at the time because Sarah fled the scene and it took police 3 weeks to track her down. This was the secret that someone had threatened to reveal. But if Jessica Walsh was the victim's sister, why had she been Sarah's maid of honor? Why had she been helping her get ready for her wedding? Either Jessica didn't know about Sarah's past, or she had been playing a very long game of revenge. I called Jessica's cell phone immediately. It went straight to voicemail. I tried the hotel room where the bridesmaids had been getting ready. Amy answered on the second ring. "Detective Sullivan, did you find Sarah? Where's Jessica?" I asked. Not bothering with pleasantries, "She left about an hour ago. Said she needed to go home and change clothes, that she couldn't stand being in her bridesmaid dress anymore." "Why, is something wrong?" Everything was wrong. But I didn't want to panic Amy until I knew more. "I need Jessica's home address, and I need it right now." Amy gave me an address in the Fremont neighborhood, and I was in my car and heading there within minutes. Martinez followed in her patrol car, and I called for backup to meet us there. If Jessica Walsh had been planning revenge against Sarah for 7 years, there was no telling what she might be capable of. The drive to Fremont gave me time to think about the timeline. Jessica had been with Sarah all morning, helping her get ready, acting like the perfect maid of honor. She could have easily planted the note in Sarah's bag at any point during the morning. She would have known Sarah's schedule, known that she planned to drive to the church alone, and she would have known exactly what secret to threaten Sarah with to get her to that meeting. But there were still pieces that didn't fit. If Jessica wanted revenge, why wait 7 years? Why become Sarah's friend first? And where was Sarah now? Jessica's apartment was in a converted house, a typical Seattle rental that had been divided into 4 units. Her apartment was on the 2nd floor, and when we climbed the stairs, I could hear voices coming from inside. I motioned for Martinez and the backup officers to position themselves around the building while I approached the door. I knocked firmly. "Jessica, this is Detective Sullivan. I need to speak with you." The voices inside stopped immediately. After a long pause, Jessica's voice came through the door. "I'm not feeling well, Detective. Can this wait until tomorrow?" "I'm afraid it can't. We need to talk about Timothy Walsh." The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear movement inside the apartment, like furniture being moved or someone walking around quickly. Then Jessica's voice again, but this time it sounded different, strained. "I don't know what you're talking about, Jessica. I know about Sarah's past. I know about the hit-and-run in Portland. I know Timothy was your brother. I need you to open this door so we can talk about this calmly." More movement inside, and then I heard something that made my blood run cold. A woman's voice, muffled and distant, calling for help. It wasn't Jessica's voice. "Sarah," I called out. "Sarah, are you in there?" The response was immediate, banging sounds, like someone trying to break free from restraints, and muffled screaming. I didn't wait for a warrant. I kicked the door open and rushed inside with my weapon drawn. The apartment was small and cluttered, but I could hear the sounds coming from what looked like a bedroom at the back. Martinez was right behind me. As we moved through the living room toward the noise, we found them in the bedroom. Sarah Mitchell was tied to a chair, still wearing the white dress she had left the hotel in, but now it was torn and dirty. Duct tape covered her mouth, and her eyes were wide with terror and relief when she saw us. Jessica Walsh was standing beside her, holding a large kitchen knife. "Don't come any closer," Jessica said, her voice shaking. "You don't understand what she did. You don't understand what she took from me." I kept my weapon trained on Jessica, while Martinez moved to the side, trying to get a clear shot if necessary. "Jessica, I do understand. I read the court documents. I know Sarah was responsible for Timothy's death, but this isn't the way to handle it. She killed my little brother, and then disappeared," Jessica said, tears streaming down her face. "She changed her name, moved to a new city, started a new life like nothing happened. She was going to get married and be happy while Timothy is dead in the ground." I could see Sarah trying to say something through the duct tape, her eyes darting. "Between Jessica and me, Jessica, how did you find her? How did you know who she really was?" "I've been looking for her for 7 years. I hired a private investigator last year, and he finally tracked her down. I moved to Seattle 6 months ago and got a job at the same hospital. I became her friend. I wanted her to trust me before I destroyed her life the way she destroyed mine." The knife in Jessica's hand was shaking, and I could see that she was on the edge of a complete breakdown. "You sent her the note this morning, didn't you? You lured her to Lincoln Park. I told her to meet me there if she wanted to keep her secret safe. But when she showed up, I couldn't go through with it. I couldn't just threaten her and walk away. She needed to pay for what she did. So you brought her here instead." She threw her bouquet in the water when she realized I wasn't going to let her go back to her perfect life. "Said it was a message, that someone would figure out what happened to her. I told her nobody would care enough to look that hard, but Jessica had been wrong about that. Sarah's bouquet washing up on shore had been the clue that led us straight to her. Jessica, you can still walk away from this. Sarah has already paid for what she did. She went to prison, she served her time. Taking her life won't bring Timothy back. Nothing will bring Timothy back," Jessica sobbed. "But at least David will know who he was really going to marry. At least everyone will know that Sarah Mitchell is a lie." I could see that reasoning with Jessica wasn't going to work. She had spent 7 years planning this revenge, and she wasn't going to give it up easily, but I also knew that she was scared and desperate, which made her dangerous. I needed to end this before someone got hurt. "Jessica, I want you to listen to me very carefully," I said, keeping my voice calm and steady. "You're not a killer. You're a grieving sister who's been carrying this pain for 7 years. But if you hurt Sarah now, you'll be throwing your own life away too. Timothy wouldn't want that." Jessica's grip on the knife tightened. "You didn't know Timothy. He was the sweetest kid in the world. He was going to be a doctor someday, going to help people. She took all of that away when she got behind the wheel drunk and then ran away like a coward." I could see Sarah's eyes, filling with tears, and I realized that this was probably the first time she had heard about the kind of person Timothy had been. The court documents had reduced him to a statistic, but Jessica was talking about a real boy with dreams and potential. "Tell me about Timothy," I said, hoping to get Jessica talking and maybe create an opening for Martinez to move closer.
"What
was he like?" "He was 12 years old and obsessed with science. He wanted to cure cancer because our grandmother died of it when he was 8. He used to do these experiments in our garage, and he'd make me be his assistant even though I was in high school and thought I was too cool for kid stuff." Jessica's voice softened as she talked about her brother, and I could see the grief that had been driving her for all these years. "He sounds like an amazing kid," I said honestly. "I can understand why losing him would be devastating." "She didn't just kill him," Jessica continued. "She destroyed our whole family. My parents got divorced 2 years later because they couldn't handle the grief. My mom started drinking. My dad moved across the country. I was the only one left to remember Timothy, the only one who cared about getting justice." I glanced at Martinez, who had managed to position herself near the window. If I could keep Jessica focused on me, Martinez might be able to create a distraction. "Jessica, you did get justice. Sarah went to prison. She lost 2 years of her life, and she's had to live with the guilt of what she did every day since then." 2 years, Jessica's voice rose to almost a shout. "She got 2 years for killing my brother and then got to start over with a new name and a new life. That's not justice. That's a joke." I could see that Sarah was trying to work her hands free from the ropes that bound her to the chair. The duct tape over her mouth was preventing her from speaking, but her eyes were communicating something urgent. She kept looking toward the dresser on the other side of the room. I followed her gaze and saw what she was trying to tell me. There was a framed photo on the dresser showing Jessica and a young boy who had to be Timothy. But there was something else in the photo that caught my attention, a man in the background who looked familiar. I had seen him somewhere before, but I couldn't place where. Jessica, is that your father in the photo with you and Timothy? I asked, hoping to buy more time while I tried to remember where I had seen the man before. Jessica glanced toward the dresser. No, that's my uncle, my dad's brother. He's the one who helped me find Sarah. He hired the private investigator. Suddenly it clicked. The man in the photo was someone I had seen at the hospital when I was interviewing Sarah's co-workers. Earlier in the week, he had been in the pediatric ward talking to one of the nurses. David had mentioned that a patient's father had been asking Sarah personal questions. Jessica, what's your uncle's name? Robert Walsh. Why does that matter? Robert Walsh. I remembered now. He had been listed as the emergency contact for a patient in Sarah's ward. He had been using his access to the hospital to get close to Sarah, to learn her schedule and her routines. This wasn't just Jessica's revenge plot. Her uncle had been helping her, possibly even orchestrating the whole thing. Where's your uncle? Now, Jessica, the question seemed to surprise her. He's supposed to be here. He was going to help me figure out what to do with her, but he hasn't shown up yet. I felt a chill run down my spine. If Robert Walsh was involved in this kidnapping and he wasn't here yet, that could mean one of two things. Either he was on his way and we needed to get Sarah out of here before he arrived, or he had never intended to help Jessica at all. He might have been using her grief and desire for revenge to get close to Sarah for his own purposes. Jessica, I need you to think about this carefully. Did your uncle suggest the plan to kidnap Sarah, or was it your idea? It was his idea. He said threatening her wouldn't be enough, that she needed to really suffer the way our family had suffered. He said we should make her disappear completely, make everyone think she had killed herself out of guilt. The pieces were falling into place now. Robert Walsh had manipulated his grieving niece into kidnapping Sarah, but his real plan was probably much darker than Jessica realized. He wasn't interested in justice or revenge. He was interested in making Sarah disappear permanently, and he was using Jessica to do his dirty work. Jessica, your uncle isn't coming to help you. He's using you. He wanted you to kidnap Sarah, so that when she turns up dead, you'll be the one who goes to prison for murder, not him. I could see the doubt creeping into Jessica's eyes. That's not true. He loved Timothy too. He wants justice just as much as I do. If he wanted justice, he would have encouraged you to go to the police, to make Sarah's past public through legal channels. Instead, he convinced you to commit a felony that could put you in prison for the rest of your life. Does that sound like someone who cares about your well-being? The knife in Jessica's hand was wavering now, and I could see that she was starting to question everything she thought she knew about her uncle's motives. I need you to put the knife down, Jessica. We can sort this out, but not while you're holding a weapon. For a moment I thought she was going to comply. Her hands started to lower, and I could see the fight going out of her. But then we heard footsteps on the stairs outside the apartment, and Jessica's eyes went wide with panic. That's him, she whispered. That's my uncle. He's here. The footsteps stopped outside the broken door, and I could hear a man's voice, calling out Jessica. What happened to the door? Are you all right in there? I motioned for Martinez to take cover behind the bedroom door while I kept my weapon trained on Jessica. The knife was shaking in her hand, and I could see that she was terrified of what her uncle would do when he saw that the police were here. Jessica, don't answer him, I whispered. Let me handle this. But Jessica was too panicked to think clearly. Uncle Robert, she called out, the police are here. They know about Sarah. The footsteps moved quickly through the apartment, and, within seconds, Robert Walsh appeared in the bedroom doorway. He was a tall, thin man in his 50s, wearing a dark jacket and jeans. When he saw me with my gun drawn, his face went through a series of expressions: surprise, anger, and then something that looked almost like relief. Well, he said calmly, I guess this is over then. Mr. Walsh, I'm Detective Sullivan with Seattle PD. I need you to keep your hands where I can see them and step into the room slowly. Robert raised his hands and moved into the bedroom, but there was something about his demeanor that bothered me. He didn't seem surprised or upset that his plan had been discovered. If anything, he seemed almost pleased. Jessica, put the knife down, Robert said to his niece. It's time to stop this. But you said we were going to make her pay, Jessica said, confusion evident in her voice. You said she deserved to suffer for what she did to Timothy. I lied, Robert said simply. I never cared about Timothy or about getting revenge for his death. I only cared about getting close to Sarah Mitchell. The room went silent except for the sound of Sarah trying to speak through the duct tape over her mouth. Jessica stared at her uncle in shock, the knife hanging loose in her hand. "What are you talking about?" Jessica asked. "Timothy was your nephew. You loved him. Timothy was a kid who got in the way of a drunk driver. That's all, but his death gave me the perfect opportunity to get close to the woman who killed him." Robert's voice was cold and emotionless, and I realized that Jessica had been manipulated by someone who was far more dangerous than I had initially thought. "You see, Detective," Robert continued, "I've been obsessed with Sarah Mitchell for 7 years, but not because she killed my nephew. I've been obsessed with her because I was supposed to be the one driving that night." The confession hit the room like a bomb. Jessica dropped the knife, and it clattered to the floor as she stared at her uncle in horror. "What? I was the one who was supposed to pick Timothy up from his friend's house that night, but I was drunk, so I called Sarah, who I had been dating at the time, and asked her to do it instead. She was drunk too, but not as drunk as I was. When she hit Timothy, I realized that I had essentially killed my own nephew by proxy. I kept my weapon trained on Robert while trying to process this new information." "So you let Sarah take the blame for an accident that you caused?" "I let Sarah take the blame for an accident that she caused," Robert corrected, "but an accident that never would have happened if I had been sober enough to pick up Timothy myself. I've been living with that guilt for 7 years, and I decided that the only way to make it right was to make Sarah suffer the way I had been suffering, by manipulating your niece into kidnapping her. By using Jessica's grief to get close to Sarah, I knew that if I could convince Jessica that Sarah deserved to be punished, she would help me get access to Sarah's life. And once I had that access, I could make Sarah disappear permanently." I could see that Jessica was in shock, trying to process the fact that her uncle had been using her grief for his own twisted purposes. "You made me into a criminal," she said quietly. "You made me kidnap an innocent woman." "Sarah Mitchell is not innocent," Robert snapped. "She killed a 12-year-old boy and then ran away. She deserved everything that was coming to her, but you're the reason she was driving that night," I pointed out. "If you had been sober, if you had picked up Timothy yourself, none of this would have happened. That's exactly why Sarah had to pay." Every time I looked at her living her happy life in Seattle, I was reminded of my own failure. I couldn't live with that anymore. I could see that Robert Walsh was a man who had been consumed by guilt and had twisted that guilt into a desire for revenge against the wrong person. He had spent 7 years planning this, using his own niece as a tool to get close to Sarah. "Mr. Walsh, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit kidnapping," I said, moving toward him with my handcuffs. "You have the right to remain silent." But as I approached him, Robert suddenly lunged toward Sarah, who was still tied to the chair. I fired a warning shot into the ceiling, and Robert froze. "Don't make this worse than it already is," I warned him. "Step away from her." Robert raised his hands again, but I could see the desperation in his eyes. "You don't understand, Detective. I can't go to prison knowing that she's still out there living her life. I can't live with the guilt anymore." "Then you should have gotten help 7 years ago instead of planning this elaborate revenge scheme." Martinez moved from her position behind the door and helped me restrain Robert while I called for additional backup and an ambulance to check on Sarah. As we led Robert out of the apartment, I could hear Jessica sobbing in the bedroom, finally understanding that she had been manipulated into committing a serious crime by someone she trusted. The case was far from over. We still had to sort out the charges against Jessica, who had been both a victim and a perpetrator in this twisted plot. And Sarah would have to deal with the fact that her past had finally caught up with her in the worst possible way. But at least she was alive, and the people responsible for her kidnapping were in custody. As we walked Robert Walsh to the patrol car, he turned to me one last time. "Detective, you need to understand something. This isn't over. Sarah Mitchell destroyed my family, and now she's destroyed Jessica's life too. She's like a cancer that spreads to everyone around her." I looked back at the apartment building where Sarah was finally being freed from her restraints and Jessica was being read her rights. Robert Walsh was wrong about one thing. Sarah Mitchell wasn't a cancer. She was a woman who had made a terrible mistake 7 years ago and had been trying to build a new life ever since. The real cancer had been the guilt and obsession that had consumed Robert Walsh and led him to manipulate his own niece into committing a crime. But as I watched the ambulance arrive to take Sarah to the hospital, I couldn't help but wonder if this case was really over, or if there were still more secrets waiting to be uncovered. 3 hours later, I was sitting in a chair beside Sarah Mitchell's hospital bed at Harborview Medical Center. She had been checked for injuries and was physically unharmed, but the psychological trauma of being kidnapped on her wedding day was evident in her eyes. The white dress she had been wearing was now evidence, replaced by a hospital gown, and her carefully styled hair from the morning was disheveled and tangled. Sarah, I know this has been an incredibly difficult day for you, but I need to ask you some questions about what happened. Sarah nodded weakly. I understand, Detective. I want to help catch whoever did this. I pulled out my notebook, though I already knew most of the story from what we had discovered at Jessica's apartment. Let's start with the note you found. In your hotel room. When did you first see it? It was in my overnight bag when I was getting ready to leave for the church. I had packed the bag the night before, so someone must have put it there sometime between last night and this morning. Did you recognize the handwriting? No, but it was written in block letters, like someone was trying to disguise it. The note said that if I wanted to know the truth about David, I should meet someone at Lincoln Park at 1:30. Sarah's voice was still shaky, but she was trying to stay composed. What did you think the note meant? What truth about David? Sarah was quiet for a long moment, and I could see her struggling with whether to be completely honest. Detective, there's something about my past that David doesn't know. Something that I've been afraid to tell him because I thought it might change how he feels about me. The hit-and-run accident in Portland 7 years ago. Sarah's eyes widened in surprise. You know about that. We found the court documents hidden in your apartment. Sarah, why didn't you tell David about your past? Because I was ashamed, Sarah said, tears starting to flow down her cheeks. I killed a child, Detective. I was drunk, I was driving, and I killed a 12-year-old boy. Then I panicked and drove away like a coward. Even though I went to prison and served my time, I've never forgiven myself for what I did. I handed her a tissue from the bedside table. But you changed your name and moved to Seattle to start over. I legally changed my name because I wanted a fresh start. I wanted to become a better person, someone who could help children instead of hurting them. That's why I became a pediatric nurse. I thought that if I could save other children's lives, maybe I could make up for the life I took. It was a tragic story, but I could understand why Sarah had kept it secret. When you got the note this morning, you were afraid that someone was going to tell David about your past. I was terrified. David is the best thing that's ever happened to me, and I knew that if he found out what I had done, he might not be able to forgive me. The note said that if I didn't come to the meeting, this person would make sure David found out about my secret. So you decided to go to Lincoln Park instead of the church. I thought I could meet with whoever sent the note, convince them to keep quiet, and still make it back to the church in time for the ceremony. I know it sounds stupid now, but I was desperate. I made notes as she spoke, building a complete timeline of the events. What happened when you got to Lincoln Park? I parked in the lot and walked down to the waterfront. There was a woman there waiting for me, Jessica, my maid of honor. At first I was confused because I thought she was supposed to be at the church with the photographer. What did Jessica say to you? She told me that she knew who I really was, that she knew about the accident in Portland. Then she told me that the boy I killed was her younger brother, Timothy. Sarah's voice broke as she said the name. I couldn't believe it. Jessica had been my friend for months. She had helped me plan my wedding, been there for me through everything, and all that time, she knew that I was the person who killed her brother. How did you react when she told you? I tried to apologize, tried to explain that I had never meant for it to happen, that I had been haunted by it every day for 7 years. But she was so angry, so full of hate. She said that I didn't deserve to be happy, that I didn't deserve to have a life when Timothy couldn't. I could see that reliving this conversation was painful for Sarah, but I needed to understand exactly what had happened at the waterfront. What happened next? Jessica had a knife with her, and she said that she was going to make sure I never made it to my wedding. She said that David deserved to know who he was really marrying, and that everyone should know that Sarah Mitchell was a lie. Is that when you threw your bouquet in the water? Sarah nodded. I thought if I threw it in the water, someone might find it and realize that something had happened to me. I knew David would never stop looking for me, and I hoped that the bouquet might be a clue that would lead him to the truth. That was smart thinking under pressure, I told her. The bouquet washing up on shore is what led us to you. Jessica forced me to walk back to the parking lot with her. She had parked right next to my car, and she made me get into her car. She said if I tried to run or scream, she would stab me right there in the parking lot. Did she say where she was taking you? She said we were going to her apartment, where her uncle was waiting. She said her uncle had been planning this for months, that he had been the one watching me and learning my schedule. This confirmed what Robert Walsh had told us during his arrest. Sarah, did you know that Robert Walsh had been posing as a patient's father at your hospital? I remember him now. He had been asking me personal questions about my schedule, my life outside of work. I thought he was just a grateful parent, but looking back, I realized he was gathering information about me. Did Jessica or Robert ever explain why they waited 7 years to confront you about the accident? Sarah was quiet for a moment, thinking. Jessica said that she had been looking for me ever since I got out of prison, but that I had disappeared when I changed my name. She said her uncle hired a private investigator last year who finally tracked me down in Seattle, and then Jessica moved here to get close to you. She got a job at the hospital and started befriending me. She said she wanted to get to know the person who had killed her brother before she decided what to do about it. But detective, I think there was more to it than that. I looked up from my notes. What do you mean? When we were at her apartment, before you arrived, Jessica was crying and saying that her uncle had lied to her about something. She said he had promised that they were just going to scare me, make me confess to David about my past. But then, he started talking about making me disappear permanently. This matched what we had observed during the confrontation at Jessica's apartment. Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. During the time that Jessica was befriending you, did she ever seem genuinely caring, or was it all an act? Sarah considered the question for several minutes. That's what makes this so confusing, detective. There were times when Jessica seemed like she really cared about me as a person. She would listen to me talk about David, help me with wedding planning, give me advice about work problems. It felt real. But other times I would catch her staring at me with this look in her eyes that I couldn't quite identify. It was like she was studying me, trying to figure something out. I thought she was just being a good friend, but now I realize she was probably trying to understand how I could be happy when her brother was dead. I closed my notebook and looked at Sarah directly. Sarah, there's something else you need to know about Robert Walsh. During his confession, he revealed that he was supposed to pick up Timothy the night of the accident. He was too drunk to drive, so he called you to do it instead. Sarah's face went pale. What are you saying? I'm saying that Robert Walsh bears some responsibility for what happened that night. If he had been sober, if he had picked up Timothy himself, the accident never would have happened. Sarah stared at me in shock, processing this new information. So he's been blaming me for 7 years for an accident that he partially caused. It appears that way. Robert Walsh has been consumed by guilt over his role in Timothy's death, and he's been projecting that guilt onto you. He manipulated Jessica's grief to get close to you so he could make you pay for his own mistakes. Sarah put her hands over her face and began to sob. That poor girl. Jessica lost her brother, and then her uncle used her grief to turn her into a criminal. She's as much a victim in this as I am. It was a mature and compassionate response from someone who had just been kidnapped and terrorized. Sarah, what do you want to happen now? Do you want to press charges against Jessica and Robert? Sarah was quiet for a long time before answering. I want Robert Walsh to be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. He's a manipulative predator who used his own niece to commit a serious crime. But Jessica, I don't know. She's been carrying this pain for 7 years, and her uncle twisted that pain into something ugly. I feel like she needs help more than punishment. I made a note of Sarah's wishes, though ultimately the decision about charges would be up to the district attorney. There's one more thing, Sarah. David is outside in the waiting room. He's been here since we brought you in. Are you ready to see him? Sarah's eyes filled with fresh tears. I don't know how to face him, detective. He's going to want to know why I went to Lincoln Park instead of the church. I'm going to have to tell him about my past, about the accident, about everything I've been hiding from him. That's a conversation you two need to have privately, I said, standing up from my chair. But Sarah, if David truly loves you, he'll find a way to forgive you for your past. Everyone makes mistakes. What matters is how you've lived your life since then. As I walked toward the door to get David, Sarah called out to me, Detective Sullivan, thank you for finding me, and thank you for saving Jessica from making an even bigger mistake. I hope she can get the help she needs to heal from this. I nodded and stepped out into the hallway, where David Chen was pacing frantically. In the waiting room, when he saw me, he rushed over. Is she okay? Can I see her? She's physically unharmed, but she's been through a traumatic experience. David, there are some things about Sarah's past that she needs to tell you. I want you to listen with an open heart, and remember that people can change. David looked confused, but nodded. I don't care what she's done in the past, detective. I just want her to be okay. As I watched David walk into Sarah's hospital room, I hoped that their relationship would be strong enough to survive the truth about Sarah's past. They had both been through enough trauma for one day, but sometimes the truth no matter how painful, was the only way to build a foundation for a real future together. 2 days later, I was sitting in the office of District Attorney Rebecca Martinez, no relation to Officer Martinez, discussing the charges against Jessica Walsh and Robert Walsh. The case had attracted significant media attention, partly because of the dramatic wedding day kidnapping and partly because of the complex moral questions it raised about justice, forgiveness, and the long-term consequences of drunk driving. Detective Sullivan, I've reviewed all the evidence and witness statements, DA Martinez said, shuffling through a thick file on her desk. The case against Robert Walsh is straightforward: conspiracy to commit kidnapping, false imprisonment, and manipulation of a vulnerable person. We're looking at 15 to 20 years if he's convicted on all counts. I nodded. What about Jessica Walsh? That's more complicated. On one hand, she did kidnap Sarah Mitchell and held her against her will for several hours. That's a serious felony. On the other hand, she was clearly manipulated by her uncle, and her actions were motivated by grief over her brother's death rather than malicious intent. Dar Martinez leaned back in her chair. I've spoken with Sarah Mitchell, and she's expressed a desire for Jessica to receive treatment rather than punishment. She believes that Jessica is as much a victim in this case as she is. What kind of treatment are we talking about? Psychological counseling, grief therapy, possibly some community service related to drunk driving prevention. Jessica has no prior criminal record, and the psychologist who evaluated her believes she can be rehabilitated. I thought about Jessica's breakdown when she realized her uncle had been using her. What does Jessica think about this arrangement? She's agreed to plead guilty to reduced charges in exchange for a treatment program. She's also agreed to testify against her uncle, which will help us secure a conviction against him. It seemed like a reasonable outcome, given the circumstances. What about the civil liability? Timothy Walsh's family could potentially sue Sarah for damages related to the original accident. That's outside my jurisdiction, but I understand that Sarah has reached out to Timothy's parents through an attorney. She wants to meet with them to apologize in person and discuss some kind of restitution. I was impressed by Sarah's willingness to face the family of the boy she had killed. How are Sarah and David doing? According to Sarah's attorney, David has been very supportive. Apparently, he told her that her past doesn't change how he feels about her, and they're planning to reschedule their wedding for next month. That was good news. After everything they had been through, they deserved a chance at happiness. There is one more thing, Detective Dar Martinez said. We've discovered that Robert Walsh has a history of manipulative behavior. We found evidence that he's been stalking other women over the years, using various pretexts to get close to them. This was new information. Are we talking about additional charges? Possibly. We're working with police departments in other cities where Robert lived to see if there are any unsolved cases that might be connected to him. It's possible that his obsession with Sarah Mitchell was part of a larger pattern of predatory behavior. I made a note to follow up on this. What kind of evidence did you find? Photographs of women taken without their knowledge, detailed notes about their daily routines, fake social media profiles used to gather information about them. Robert Walsh appears to be a serial stalker who used his grief over Timothy's death as a cover for his obsessive behavior. This put Jessica's manipulation in an even darker context. Her uncle,